Hello and welcome. My name is Craig Lund and I am the Vice President of Mentorship at AMA Toronto. And this is the Empowered Marketer, a show where we bring together leaders in the marketing world to share their experience and help empower your leadership potential. Today I'm sitting with Arthur Fleischmann. He is a 2016 inductee of Canada's Marketing Hall of Legends. He is one of the founders of John Street and the current lead of WPP Canada and Group C CEO of Ogilvy. He is also an award-winning marketer. He has published a book in the past as well, and he is a recovering photocopy salesman.
You're digging deep into the well for that one.
Well, let's go right into it then,
Sure.
Arthur. So, you have a rather unusual role in that you are now a network leader here in Canada. It's a role that wasn't around before.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
What is your typical day of life now? What's it look like?
Well, that's a good question because I wear a couple of hats. So I'm still overseeing John Street and the Ogilvy Group. So in that regard, there's a lot of the things you might expect from a CEO, from HR and new business and financial planning, to the mentorship and development of people. Then on the WPP side, as country manager, we're preparing for a major move to a co-location, to a new campus in the first quarter of next year. So with that comes all the thinking about how do we bring together a fairly diverse group of offering into one location and get the best out of this team. How do we, make synergy between the teams? How do we break down some of the barriers between the different operating companies? How do we bring some of the best of WPP to the market, which includes some technology, which includes development programs, training programs, research and analytics. So the job gets pretty diverse. It gets pretty hectic.
You didn't talk much about client exposure there, so what's that look like?
Yeah. So these days, my client exposure would be on an ad hoc basis in some cases. So when one of the operating companies I oversee would like some support and leadership at a client level, I'll step in. Specifically, Theo, which is an agency we stood up during the pandemic to service the Rogers communications business, also takes up a good chunk of my time. And so I spend my time working with the leadership team of the agency and the client, getting that organization running.
Well, let's go back to the junior days of Arthur. Many people say that you stand on other people's shoulders to see where you are today, and mentorship is a major portfolio of ours at AMA Toronto. Are there mentors of yours that kind of shaped who you are now?
When you said standing on shoulders, I was hoping you were going to say standing on people's hands or something like that. I've been actually very lucky. People will often recount horror stories of bosses they've had in the past, and I can tell you I've genuinely never had a bad boss. But there were a few people that really stand out to me. When I went into my first marketing job, it was at a company called General Foods in New York. It's now Mondelez. And I had a boss who was ex-agency. And not that per se matters, but I think she took a very different approach to how she built teams. And her thing was to push all of us to do things that we had never done before and do them with the confidence that one day I hope we hoped we would have. So, for example, we worked in product development, and one night we were off in Paramus, New Jersey, focus group capital of the East Coast, and we're getting ready for focus groups. And she said, "I want you to go in and lead this group." I said, "I don't even know what a focus group moderator does. Just go in there and talk to these people. Talk about, why they buy the product they buy and who uses it and what are their disappointments and what are." I went in and moderated an evening worth of focus groups. And, what I take from that is, as a mentor, we need to push our people, push the people we mentor past their comfort zone. I think you should always live a little bit in your discomfort zone. And once you're really comfortable with it, push to the next one. Yeah, I think Eva stands out as a great mentor. I had another great mentor, Tom Nelson, who sadly passed away last year. Quite young. He was creative director or chief creative officer and chairman of Amrati and Puris, which was a very successful boutique agency in New York. It was opening in Toronto, and then ultimately it sold to IPG. And his thing was all around communication and simplifying communication in presentations, really thinking about storytelling, even in a meeting. Lead people through a narrative that's intriguing and interesting. And I'd put together a presentation, I remember, for Labatt Genuine Draft. I don't know why I remember this. And he looks, and he had sort of that New Yorker kind of whiny voice. And he, I love what you're saying. I just hate how you're saying it. And I realized at that point, you really have to think about, what goes on the slide. When do you want your audience to stop looking at the screen and look at you as the presenter? So I learned a lot from him as well.
So, taking some of those learnings and looking at who you are as a leader today, you mentioned a couple of things before we went on the camera, and you talked about making people giggle. You're incessantly organized, and assholes are not always assholes. So maybe you could touch on those.
So let's go in the order you went. So sense of humor has just been something I grew up with. Like in my family, we teased each other as a sign of love, and if you weren't being teased, you were probably being ignored. And then as we opened John Street, I had these 4 partners. One in particular, Angus Tucker, is one of the funniest guys around. He's just so quick and witty. And the two of us every day would banter. And then we realized it was actually a very important part of leadership, because when you use humor, you de-escalate, you bring down the tension. And let's face it, marketing and advertising, it's a pretty intense industry. So using humor can really set the stage. And I also think it signals we're going to have some fun. Like, it's okay to have fun. I know it's a business, but clients come in and they go, okay, this is going to be the good part of the day. So sense of humor has always been a big part of how I operate. And sometimes I'm told I go a little over the line. It's like, okay, so I'm a little over the line, push me back. But better that than, being a little too tame. The organization thing, I would say I'm actually pathologically organized. It's probably an OCD thing. I really do believe that you need to have a clear list of things to do. It could start off as a long list and then just cut it down to 3. Because if you're trying to do too many things, you're kidding yourself. You're really not going to get to anything past 2 or 3. So at any given time, you'll find on my phone or on my computer or scribbled on paper a couple of things I got to do, and that's Monday to Friday, and it's Saturday and Sunday as well. And that's another de-stressor. So you'll hear a lot of narrative in the way I talk about bringing down stress, and that's how I function. Because as I say, like, I tend to be wired as an anxious person, and I assume most people are. So I look for ways of organizing. And then the last thing, I guess, is a little bit about having empathy and just assuming that not everyone is bad. Not everyone is an asshole. And when they behave badly, if they behave like an asshole, just stop and think for a minute. Is there a context to it? Are they going through a bad day? Do they lack training? Maybe they didn't know how to show up and give feedback on creative or on performance. Maybe they don't know how to operate under stress or in abstract situations. So if you come in assuming people are not bad, fundamentally bad, you're going to be a lot happier and you're going to be healthier in your relationships. Now, if you are demeaned consistently and made to feel badly about yourself consistently by someone, they probably are an asshole and you should avoid them. But generally speaking, in my 30 years in the business, I've really come across, I can probably only think of 2 people that would fall into the AH camp.
That resonates for me big time, and I find that our younger counterparts especially always take things so personally rather than stepping back and going, could something else be going on here?
Yeah.
We hear that with feedback with mentors in our mentoring program as well. It's like, oh, this person is just not being responsive or whatnot. And generally speaking, something in life is interfering. It's divorce, they're dealing with fertility issues, like all these other things anything beyond your work. Right?
And it could be you, right? Yeah. Like it could be how, no, I don't mean you, Craig, because, you're not.
I have that effect.
But you do, right? But it could just be how you show up to things. And when you get some good 360 feedback, maybe you come on too strong, or maybe you take notes on your computer and you're conveying, I'm not listening, when actually you're really listening because you're writing everything down. So you got to do a pretty good 360 when you hit those situations.
Now, you said something that was surprising, and I find that almost everybody's had some kind of career stagnation in their careers, whether it's unexpectedly getting fired or just losing steam, and you said you haven't had that. That's a privileged thing to be able to say.
I also lied, I guess. So I did start in sales, right? I started in sales before I got my MBA. I started in sales at Xerox, and I did okay. But then there was this unfortunate time that I was partnering with another salesperson, a young woman, and we dropped a photocopier, because that's what we sold in those days, out the back of a car onto a highway.
This is your day at Xerox.
This was my darkest moment at Xerox. I don't know if I'd call that stagnation. It might have just been felony. I don't know. It could have been something more criminal and nefarious. But in general, I'd say I never had stagnation in my career because I think I've always been very self-directed. And so when I'm put into a role, I do the role and I try to get that job done by 11 or 12 o'clock in the day, and spend the rest of the day doing what I think needs to be done to deliver the vision of the organization or the team or my partners. And so I've always created my own job descriptions, and I would encourage people to take the role and deliver on that role. If your job is a project manager, be a fantastic project manager. And then ask, do we have the best project management tools? Is there something better we could do? Could I help that team, which is not performing all that well, perform better? Could I mentor someone? Could I volunteer for something? And I think if you do that, you'll always find, I read this article in the New York Times, that if you can have 20 minutes of joy per day, you decrease your burnout by an exponential factor. So you'll find if you get your day job done and you focus on a couple of really interesting things for the afternoon, you will get that 20 minutes of joy, assuming the morning wasn't joyful, and you won't burn out and you won't stagnate either.
I love that. So as far as another question we like to ask our leaders is, marketing has had a lot of change as far as new channels, new technologies, my stack this, my stack that. What has changed, if anything? What do marketers need to really stop doing?
Okay, so I think the first thing I would say is marketing actually hasn't changed that much. Our job is to find or create demand for a group of people or businesses, but people generally are consuming. And that hasn't fundamentally changed. We've replaced terms like unique selling proposition with purpose. And we've replaced, campaigns that are largely broadcast based with various social and omnichannel strategies. And we've gone from fairly, targets that are like 18 to 49 adults, who like beer, to fairly niche specific targets. But they're still targets, and there's still points of communication, and there's still narrative. Sometimes the narrative is super quick and it's activation. That used to be called a coupon. Now it's something else. So I don't think those things have changed. I just think that we have a lot more opportunity, more options in front of us, so more complexity, bigger teams to coordinate because of that complexity. What should marketers stop doing?
You liked something on LinkedIn the other day. I think Stéphane Argent had left an article about our current climate with COVID. And there's a great resignation that is alive and well. We're seeing it. I'm a headhunter. It's unreal how many companies are trying to hire, 18 months of back hiring people who wanted to leave 18 months ago, finally doing that. So you've got pressure on the agency side, client side, financial pressure, and they're aiming at agencies right now.
Yeah. Well, okay. So if you want to take it there, then I will declare myself. So cost of staff have gone up, I would guess somewhere around 20 to 25, maybe even 30% in some areas. But compensation for agencies has not gone up. And while marketers may think that our margins are very rich and we waste a lot of money in the agency world, I've been a client and I've been on the agency side, and I've been, on top of a large portfolio, and I've run a small entrepreneurial shop. I can tell you most agencies are extremely efficient with their money, and most of it, 60-70%, goes to salaries. So when you shortchange your agency, you're literally shortchanging the talent you want on your business. And so I think marketers should be a little more empathetic about, if you want the best on your business, you're going to have to pay for it. If you don't think you're getting the best on your business, have that conversation, right? Like, talk about the people. Are you getting the skill sets you need? Are you getting the quality of people you want? But if the answer is yes, I think it was David Ogilvy who talked about the extra $10 you're going to give an agency cost you nothing, but actually could make a 1 or 2% margin difference for an agency. So, I would ask clients to engage in a really meaningful conversation with their agency. Don't relegate it to procurement to have all those conversations, because you, the client, the marketing director, is the recipient of the service and the recipient of those individuals. So sit down and talk to your agency about getting the right skill set and then paying fairly for it.
Love that. Well, Arthur, I got to say thank you to you. This is my 20 minutes of joy.
Is that it?
For the day. I loved having you join us today. So this is Craig Lund. This is the Empowered Marketer. I hope that you learned a little bit more from Arthur's experience. Our goal was to empower your leadership potential, and hope you were able to find some nuggets that will be useful for you in your day-to-day and your leadership growth. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Craig.